Welcome to One Question. This is a podcast which brings together two Christians and a skeptic in a conversation about the state of the world and what justice looks like in practice. Each episode returns to one core question: how do we move from words to action in ways that actually strengthen community? We unpack what's happening, name the forces behind it, and stay focused on what people can build together. I'm your host, Matthew Brake, and as we were discussing right before we pressed record, I guess I am technically in charge of making stuff happen and keeping stuff running on time. And I guess some would call that the producer, even though truly the real producer here is one of my co-hosts, Moki Masao. Moki, how are you?
I'm under a lot of pressure from you all, but nevertheless, I'm okay.
That's good. We'll try to ease off. We wouldn't want you to get so stressed out that you lose all of your hair. Too late. Too late. Don't worry. I'm sure I'm falling right behind you here.
It's okay.
And then, of course, our skeptic co-host, Jason Bayless.
Hello. And I don't want to mention any names, but their name starts with Matt, is the root of all problems for what we're experiencing.
That's okay. I deserve that. I was trying to say, no, I'm not the producer. And then I trailed off. So, fellas, how have you been?
Good. It's been hot.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, see you guys next time.
It's been good. It's been super hot, and I'm ready for winter.
Ready for winter here at the beginning of summer. Moke, how about you?
I've been okay, man. It's the beginning of summer break, my first summer break since in 9 years. Different context, but still summer break. So it feels nice to be able to look forward to a Sunday and not have to go to work on Monday. So it feels nice, but it's busy. It doesn't get any less busy, but it's good not to have to be with people I may not want to be with. So
That's the spirit.
that works.
It's just this. You're giving an advertisement for why getting a job in education, aside from the fact that all of our educators get attacked by various political apparatuses. Like, really, the people who want to go into education don't want to indoctrinate children. They just want a summer break. That's all they want, man. That's all.
You know, I'll tell you, I fell in love with the academic calendar in grad school, and I just don't see myself. I don't know. I've done the corporate thing and all the different things, and I'm just like that. Just I don't see a better way than this. I guess there is money is nice to have, but man, I think there's some nicer things to have in life, like time and relaxation. And
What is the Avengers Endgame line? No amount of money ever bought a second of time.
yeah,
And then he has the moment where he hugs his father and it gets closure, and it's just the whole thing. Well, cool. Well, I am coming off a busy week. My stepdaughter just got married yesterday, and Jason said it was hot, and I will say,
Not the wedding, the temperature.
yeah, no, yeah, the temperature was
Clarification,
very
please.
hot outside. Yes. Yeah, no, it was like yesterday, the rehearsal and then the wedding were the only 2 days on the calendar, both leading up to them and coming after them, where the temperature was that hot. It was the two hottest days of the next 10 days, and humidity and the whole thing. But it was a great wedding. They were a beautiful couple, and I love the two of them. Both of them have all the integrity in the world. So they're gonna they have all the tools for having a good marriage. So I'm
Lovely.
rooting for them both. So yeah, so it's been busy, even though I am just teaching a smaller summer semester for the next probably 2 or 3 more weeks, and then I get basically the month of July off. I've been doing a study at NIH though to also maybe make some extra money on the side. So I'm donating my body to science. So I have a 9-day stay coming up in July. Doing a keto diet. So it's a whole thing. Like, summer is busy, it's full, and I'm able to do some side projects, one of which, Moki, we're trying to do together for on the side, doing an interview with a creator of this one comic we were both reading. But yeah, no, life is good. It feels full, but I agree, the academic calendar and getting the summer off it's nice. I'm able to be a little bit more thoughtful and creative. So, and happy that I have some time today to talk to you fine gentlemen. So I believe last
Indeed.
time, for our brave viewers who've hung on for the last 6.5 minutes, the last time you joined your heroes, we were discussing some of the questions Moki had about Jason's work on Radical Guide, which he started as a movement initially mapping different radical movements, mutual support networks, and then eventually ended up getting into the mutual support task himself, which, Jason, you currently have, is it still this month you have a fundraising drive where someone's matching donations? Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, so until July 11th, which happens to be my birthday, so
Yeah.
Let's go.
we have a supporter who has offered up to $6,000 to match any new monthly donation that comes in from now until July 11th. So what that means, if you donate $10, your first month actually gets increased to $20. So it's a perfect time to jump in and actually support this work, Radical Guide, and all the work we're doing. We're definitely committed. I mean, you heard from the podcast, and you'll probably hear from this one. We're committed into what the main question is, like, what does it look like if we actually create a world that works for all of us? And then the experiment that we are doing is creating all these different things through communication, through education, through actual action that actually starts building those models and lift up those who are already building those models. So yeah, if you're interested, please go check out Radical Guide, radicalguide.com. And if you're inclined to, please donate. Right now is a great time to do it.
Great. So we talked about that. We also got into a discussion. You talked previously, and well, it'll probably come up again here about you discussed the box of allowable actions, right? And I'm not going to rehash it here, but the whole idea that sometimes when you get involved in movement work, you're sort of told that you're only allowed to operate within certain parameters, which themselves almost inherently contain unjust elements about them. For instance, like it just is the case that at minimum we accept the fact that there's, let's just making up a number here, 25% pollutants in our water. Like you can't argue for getting rid of more than that or something, right? And so like whatever you do has to accept some sort of minimum of injustice. And so going outside of the box of allowable actions might mean questioning that criteria. Like, no, we don't want 25% pollutants in our water. Like we want no pollutants in our water. Like, and so even though that goes against the consensus of what's possible, am I articulating that well?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to it, I mean, everything you said is 100% accurate. The another layer to it is also is it allows the state and the establishment, those who are in positions of power, to control the narrative in terms of what actions are acceptable. So what we see often, we saw it during Black Lives Matter, we saw it during Occupy Wall Street, we see it through the data centers. Protests that are going, is the narrative is then controlled. The type of action that you're doing, the type of protest that you're doing is unacceptable, so we're not going to listen to you. So it automatically helps not only control the narrative of what the conversation and the debate is, but it also dictates what actions are acceptable in the eyes of the mainstream. So if you protest, if you're loud, they control the narrative, and the media is saying, look, these people are being unruly, when the reality is that these people are just standing up for their community. They don't want their water polluted. They don't want data centers. They don't want abusive, oppressive practices in their community. But because of the box of allowable action, it injects how we actually can perform to make change. It is controlled in that sense as well.
So even if there are a lot of people involved in some movement or protest that's considered outside the box of allowable action, maybe this group of people represents a sizable chunk of the population such that, the people who represent them should be like, no, this is a voice of our constituency. We should listen to them. Because it happens outside of the box of allowable action, we're able to be dismissive of them. Like that's not a legitimate voice we should take into consideration.
Yeah, so what you'll hear on the news often when you see mass uprising or mass protest, like look at Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and all the narrative that was to be dismissive is, well, why don't they just vote? Why don't they use the systems, the political systems that are there to make their voices heard? Why do they have to get out in the street and stop business as usual? Why don't they talk to their congressmen? Why don't they, talk to the council? Why don't they do this instead of actually saying, well, why are they doing this? There's something a systemic injustice is happening that we need to fix. The narrative is already controlled because what you're doing is it doesn't support us, so you're doing it wrong.
Not to mention all sorts of dark money and stuff that gets into the system. where it's like that your congressperson is going to listen more to the people wetting their beak than the many people meeting their representative. Or even perhaps one thing you could do is maybe you do vote, but then your congressional district is broken up into 3 different congressional districts, and you water down the power of black voices, and in a way that's very against the spirit of the civil rights movement and what the Voting Rights Act was meant to do, and what Martin Luther King himself said, that when there's been historic, let's say, silencing or oppression or marginalization of voices of color, you sort of need to go above and beyond, because focus on those voices of color to give them a extra boost to make up for that historic lack of representation. But that's a whole conversation for another time. I just wanted to say it here because I've had people, this stupid argument like, yeah, it's racist to have it's racist to do a district based on race. And it's like, well, this is the problem with colorblind languages. You're missing the point. But we don't have to talk about that. So anyway, that's what we talk.
Just to tie it back to your question, that is a perfect example of how they create that box of what's allowed. So they change the rules and then say, oh, you can no longer participate the way that you were participating. And if you try to participate that way, it's no longer allowed because it's outside of the confined nature of what we created. Not we, the
royal
yeah.
we, the projected we, as it were. Yeah.
Anyway,
well,
that
good.
was a rabbit hole, but that was fun. Keep your intro going.
I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. But I'm also trying not to be the dominant voice in this conversation. And
I'm mad.
since we've summed up our last episode, Moki has a number of questions. He came in last episode to talk to Jason about some of the work he's been involved in and his own perspective in some of the movement work he's done. And we got to 2 questions out of many more. So, Moki, I want to sort of turn things over to you as the main driver of this conversation to sort of pick up where we left off. I mean, you have a couple of different directions here we could go, but as we said outside of this recording, I think there are a lot of interesting thoughts here that you have collected that could be really good drivers of our conversation. So why don't I take her away, Captain?
Yeah, man. Even talking about the matching donations for Radical Guide, I mean, one of the things we talked about last time was about how you use your funds, to help kind of pay the rent for farmers, and because of whatever situation they have going on. And you kind of talk about I don't think this is I can't remember if it was specifically about the farmers that you're helping, but the 50-mile radius law or rule, and kind of how the nature of that law, and it's I mean, rooted in systemic racism, and how, coming from where I come from, and you can say the conservative Christian world, a lot of people that my friends even, I think the systemic racism like this, for example, is one that's not necessarily like directly, or it's not like, okay, we're going to get after, Mexicans, and we're going to like make their lives miserable. It's almost like an economic sort of thing. They'll say racism doesn't exist. And then you point to this and you say, well, that's not racism at their farmers. And they're like, there's whatever kind of narrative you want to make. And so that's an aside, but it's systemic racism to me just continues to be this thing that's just, it's this narrative that's just so frustrating. But nevertheless, regarding just even the work you do, how do you identify, some of these communities or people that have a need, or there's some injustice going on that is enough to warrant you guys to say, okay, we recognize this and we're going to step in and, take action for them, and I think in this case with them, because you want, it's that mutual aid, rather than simply giving them a whole bunch of money and leaving and telling them, like, God be with you or whatever. So what is that process like? And then even with the community that you're helping with the rent, like what did you see? What did you guys see with them?
Well, a couple of things. Just because identity is important, we work with farm workers, not farmers, and the distinction. The distinction of that is the people who are in the field.
Get it?
And because those are the ones who struggle within that system. Not saying that nobody outside of that doesn't struggle, but the level of degree of suffering, oppression, systemic racism, systemic inequality is rampant within that community, of that system. So that's one indicator of how we look. The other
Yeah.
thing, going back to the systemic racism comment you made, I've never met anybody who thought they were racist. So there's the mainstream narrative of when we think of a racist, we think of somebody in a Klan
Yeah,
hood.
a bigot. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we talk about racism, systemic racism, white supremacy, those are the images that normally are painted in people's mind. You know, a Nazi in a uniform, Southerner in a Klan robe. But the reality is that racism, white supremacy, are the practices in which the system operates is what makes that. So I just want to name that because I think we're going to be getting into the nuances. So I want to put that preference there. So when people hear us talk about white supremacy or racism, they understand that we're talking about that aspect of it, not individuals who believe that they are superior to somebody because of their color of their skin. That is a manifestation of a belief that is not systemic racism. So there's a Venn diagram that includes both, but they're separate. And then in terms of how we choose and how we pick, I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question because it's never shown up to me as that I'm making a choice to do something or not do something. The reality is everything that we do is binary. You know, has either I picked this, that means I didn't pick that. But the conscious action of it is rooted in where's our agency? Where do we actually have means to do something? So with our mutual aid general fund, and what that is we give out $550 right now. We'll increase that as the program grows. We give out $550 to one group every month. And we have like 13 groups right now in the rotating pool of that. And that started because a Radical Guide supporter reached out to me because I was putting out there that I wanted to do something like this, and I hadn't really named it yet. This is the early days of Radical Guide, and the supporter said, "You know what? I have an idea that." And I'm on the ground working with these different groups that they're doing great things. It would be really cool if we could help support them. So through just conversation with the community, I was like, well, what are they up to? Are they actually doing the systemic work that, you know, that we as an organization, as Radical Guide, would support? And for the most part, all of them the answer was yes. So we're like, well, then how do we actually do this? There's a lot of groups on the ground doing this work that go unheard of. So we just started. We just said, okay, this month we're giving out money to this. Or well, the actual physical process was that we emailed them, got on a call with them, and said, hey, this is our idea. Would you even want to accept money from us? Because that's important to me on multiple levels. One level is that when people receive money, especially from nonprofits or within the nonprofit system, the donor class system, there's usually attachments to that. There's an entitlement that people bring to those conversations. Like, well, I'm donating to you, so therefore I should have insight or input to what you're doing. I'm not saying that happens everywhere, but that is, you know, an overwhelming rule in that domain. So the part of the conversation was like, this is who we are. This is what we're going to raising money for. And this is what we're going to turn over this money to you because we see value in your work. You can spend that money knowing what you're working on in any way that you see fit. We're not going to say yeah, it needs to be earmarked for this or it needs to be earmarked for that because we see value in your work and we want to support you. Are you okay with that? And luckily, everybody so far said yes. And from there, the conversation is like, well, if we're doing this, not that there's any expectation, is there a two-way conversation or collaboration in this? What would you want from us in addition to the funding? And what might we want from you, not in terms of exchange, but to elevate and amplify? And so what that ends up looking like is like many of the conversations was like saying, well, we struggle with people who come and volunteer, don't understand movement education. They don't understand power dynamics. We're struggling with that. So like, great, Radical Guide can create educational materials that is free and open to everybody, but you can use it to give it to onboarding process to your group. And I'd say for the other thing is like what Radical Guide would want is kind of reports of what you've done the month or the quarter or whatever, not so we can monitor it, but so we can share your story. So we can let people know who've donated what is happening and then let other people who haven't donated know what's possible and maybe be inspired to do it where they are. So those are the conversations. Like, are you okay with this? This is what we're doing? And then we go from there. And so that's the mechanism. Your question was like, well, how do we pick? It shows up for the most part of what's in front of us. If we're constantly looking, I think yeah, if we're constantly looking at the world, is like, how do we step into this world from a space of like we're working to improve, not just improve, but build something different. That means that we have a political analysis of the world. That means that we have a specific looking. So how do we build and manifest things that coming from that allows us to get closer to that goal? So for me personally, I'm constantly in conversation with people on various different formats, like calls, like, Zoom calls and stuff like that, emails, everything. And I'm always asking the questions like, what do you need? What would be helpful? Not coming from a place like, oh, I'm going to give you an answer to it, but just so I can have it in my mind. So when I'm thinking throughout the day and through the week or whatever, I'm like, well, yeah, this question has popped up or this problem has popped up a lot across multiple groups or multiple people. So what skills and knowledge do I have or Radical Guide can offer to fill that gap? Because it's never binary. It's never, well, we just need education, everything's going to be okay, or we just need money and everything's going to be okay. It's both, and then a bunch of nuance details in the middle of it. And so if we're in the conversation, it's like, well, how can we fill those gaps and show up in a way that we're actually building something collectively together based on lived experiences? Then I don't think anything bad will come from that. I think we'll make mistakes, but I don't think anything bad comes from it and moves us closer to achieving our goal. I don't know if that answered your question. So
I want to make an observation and then ask a follow up. Possibly, Moki. I don't want to step on your toes because it does reflect one of the questions you had sort of prepared.
Please carry on. No, go ahead.
So on the one hand, Jason, in terms of how you pick, if we want to speak of it, that crudely, right? Like, some of this just involves you. I mean, I would guess so much of it involves who you're actually in relationship and conversation with. I mean, that would, like, there's an inherent relationality to what you're doing, right? Like, you have to sort of build these relationship and know people, right? So that you can make these connections, build these relationships. So there's a relationality to it, I think, that is inherent in coming to someone from that place of mutuality, reciprocity, and relationship. I have two questions, and
can I make a comment to that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I don't want to oversimplify. I think it's important that I don't want to romanticize that relationship aspect, because every single thing that we do, regardless if it's connected to social justice, making the world better or not, stems from being in relationship. So we all have that access point. So I just want to there's nothing special about that. So relationship stems from people who just see the website that I've never talked to in my life that email me and say, hey, I got this project, let's talk. And that's how it comes. So I just don't want to, the reason I'm saying this is because I just see that normally when we talk about social justice, because of the way that we're taught to look at social justice, that a lot of people think that there are special skills and abilities that people have that normal people don't have. And I just want to break that, because relationship and being in relationship with folks is what we do every single day, regardless of the purpose behind.
Yeah. I guess another question I wanted to ask is, when it comes to withdrawing support, I would guess that part of this would involve the recognition that, like, everyone has agency in any type of mutual support, so that if you choose to take your support away, that's a recognition, like, that's just like, I voluntarily gave it, I voluntarily take it away, I have agency in that. I guess a question I would have is, like, I can guess offhand, but what would cause you maybe to withdraw potential support from projects?
A couple of things. We won't give funds to groups that have $1 million budgets, not because we don't want groups to be successful and not have $1 million budgets. It's just they don't need us anymore. They're doing their thing. They got the thing, so we can turn our attention. They got the donor class, happening in that, so we can pull back and say, now we have these funds to focus on groups who are flying under the radar, who are doing great work. We can be in conversation with them to see what we can do to help elevate them as well. Other ways, other things that we would withdraw our support from is if their values changed. So, even businesses, nonprofits, grassroots organizations, there's sometimes character changes that happen within that. And so if a character change or a purpose change shifts in that, and they start supporting things that we don't think is useful, then we would withdraw or support. And speaking of withdrawing support,
This is your
in
last time.
the in
Yeah. No, I'm just
what's
kidding.
that? No,
I said
this is it. You're cut off.
this is your last time on the show. Speaking of withdrawing support, yeah.
During the setup process, there's I explicitly say that this is a mutual relationship which can be dissolved at any time. So if there's anything that we're doing that the group that we're giving money to says, "Oh, you're jeopardizing, our image because you're talking about anarchism and we're shifting this way," they can always just say, "Hey, we don't want to be a part of this," and that's not viewed as a negative or viewed as, "Oh, we did something wrong." That's viewed as, "Well, that's what relationship means. You have the permission to tell me no." And so it's being in conversation, being in relationship, and being in tune to where we want to go with the direction that we want to go.
I guess my last follow up, because it's interesting you talk about, not supporting groups that have like bigger budgets. That does raise a question, and I know it's one Moki brought up previously, but one of scale, right? Like, Moki, I'm just going to read what you wrote here, but this issue of going from local to bigger, right?
Hmm.
And the problems involved in that type of institutionalization. So I'm wondering, is it more about you? I mean, in your case, for your own, for the thing that you're, doing, it's like obviously you have a vision of what that scale might look like, but I'm wondering about, but even outside of your own org, like what does scaling up look like in terms of partnering, addressing suffering? Like, yeah, Moki, I don't know if you want to throw in an addendum to that, but it was making me think of that problem of scaling up because I'm thinking too, like, let me give some background, like, and Moki, I think you share this world where, particularly if you grow up in, like I did in like the Christian right 90s, the argument was always, we shouldn't have government assistance programs, whatever they are, everything from SNAP to Medicaid, Medicare, Social
Hmm.
Security, disability insurance, unemployment, all this stuff. Because people will depend on the government, but what they
Hmm.
should be depending on are localized relationships, specifically a
Hmm.
local church, charity, which we had that conversation about charity can mask oppression. But the whole idea is that it happens in some sort of local voluntary relational context. And I mean, and I think we're talking about two different things here, but just think about how those arguments came across. I always wondered about the problem of scale. Like if, in terms of the type of social services that are provided for the government with all the apparatus of the government, you would never get all that from local church communities, ministries,
Hmm.
because they just don't have the organizational power. Like they don't have like you would still like they might be able to catch some people from falling through the cracks, but it just doesn't scale up, right?
Well, I think, Matt, like, so it just reminds me of what we talked about. I think it was when you were talking about your kind of where you came from.
Mm.
Like the reason, like churches, like where we came from, have no like compelling vision for social change.
Yeah.
So even if they're gonna help you and like all right, so let's say I'm not gonna rely on the government for food through SNAP or food stamps or whatever. Okay, I'm gonna go to my church. Okay, the church ain't gonna they're gonna help you. There's no, it's not like, okay, I'm gonna replace and then also make better. That's not the framework. And so I think I just wanted to say that just because when you're saying it, I was thinking back to my own, like when I grew up and all the churches I know and all people I know. Like, and I don't know if I think it was one of the questions, and it's just mainly just managing oppression so that society doesn't fall apart. It's managing the level of homelessness so that, I don't know, so that you have somebody to always preach to, I guess. I don't know. And like the thing is that we talked about when I was talking about my own life and my own upbringing and story, there's good, like a lot of good work gets done from even that framework, that way of just like helping and like social action, but it's still very problematic.
Yeah.
And like I've done a lot of like door dashing and other just like delivery services for many years, and I always get the biggest tips from the apartments. I get like small tips and like no tips from the mansions. And the thing is, I heard once a billion the guy said he asked a billionaire how he got to where he's at. He said, well, a lot of people, watch every dollar. Like I watch every single penny. And so there's a way in which, like, when you become very successful and like you like financially whatever, it's because you're very careful about where every single thing goes, so you can maintain your level of power and influence or whatever it may be. So the thing is, on paper, it looks good in that, hey, you don't need the government. Your church community has got people that have the resources, whatever, they can help you, and like lean on them. But the thing is, they're there not to create change. The people who are affluent in these churches are not there to like say, okay, what can I do? How can I use what God has given me to help others? They're there to say, hey, look, God, you give me all these things, man. Thank you, God. Let me give you to this church here to the building fund. I did my bit. Now I gotta go to soccer practice. Even the mindset is not there for like, okay, I'm gonna do this, use it to help others. That's not the mentality for why they have all the money that they've got. So on paper it makes sense, but the compelling vision is not there for this is not just for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of Christians who are real estate investors, and they tell, and they're the same guys I was talking about. They, hey man, get into this thing and like, raise your rents every single year. It doesn't matter, man. Like, it's your thing. You can always raise the rent, but you can't. Once you get a fixed rate mortgage, you never have to worry about that raising again. But get you a little investment property and raise the rent. Don't matter if it pushes out a renter who has nowhere else to go. It's about you, and that is how God is blessing you. So, anyways, that's like a crazy long tangent that came from a question you're supposed to be asking, and I apologize for
No, it's
going crazy.
This is the episode of tangents, and I certainly recognize like some of the ideology informing that like anti-government program thing is coming from a way different place than like an anarchist inspired attempt at mutual support. I am
well. I want to
curious
talk about.
though.
I want to tie it to kind of the box of allowable action act thing, because
Oh snap!
what I want to bring in is that Christian nationalist the thought of like, you don't need the government, you don't need all that. That is co-optation of movement language. Because we see, I mean, we can look at the current administration. We're trying to get rid of these things that take care of people because it makes somebody else more money elsewhere. So if they can co-opt movement language that sets the tone of we're taking care of each other, rely on your community, rely on your church, they can make an argument saying, look, nobody's using these resources, so why do we even have them? Let's get rid of them. And then that leaves the community without, if the community hasn't built the infrastructure. And nobody's being taught to build the infrastructure, so the community is going to be left out. That's what we're seeing right now when they cut Medicaid and the other health stuff the administration has done. We're seeing the community being left out because the infrastructure is not there, because the narrative and the message from those in power were not authentic. They were co-opted language to achieve a goal. It's the same thing that we talked about. Charity is not something that actually takes care of it, but it's something built into the system. So the system doesn't have to pick up the slack on that. They can say, oh, that's a problem. The community is going to take care of it. It's a write-off for us. So with that said, I forgot what your main question was, but I just want
Scaling
to
up.
say that, yeah, so scale, I think, is also another thing that people think is so important, like that's a measure of success, or that's a measure of something of value. And when we're talking about building a community, when we're talking about building the infrastructure that takes care of each other, and you're trying to inject, well, how do we scale this? You're not having the conversation. You're not having the relationship. So I think it's the wrong approach to. It might be a beneficial approach somewhere else, but when it comes to building that infrastructure, building the world that works for all of us, that we're all taking care of, I think scale's the wrong question, or the wrong come from in that aspect of it. Because to give more detail to it, when you're in conversation of like, what does this community need right now? And let's say the community says that they're there's huge food insecurity in our community. Your first response is not, well, how do we scale food? Your first thing is like, well, how do we bring food into the community? How do we generate food in the community? How do we actually build the infrastructure that the community is producing the food? And then once the community is taken care of, where that's no longer a burden, then maybe scale comes in. But I think scale is still the wrong framing because it puts a resource capital language on something that is not meant to be resource, that shouldn't be a capital. Or a resource in that sense. So yeah, I'll stop there. I don't know if that made sense, but there was another question in there and I don't remember what it was.
That was all of my questions. I do have a spot I think this can go, but I said that I would not be the driver of this, so I am not.
Well, let me. There's the box of actions that we talked about, and I think just this idea of the you talked about in the beginning about the narrative, like what narrative we're being sort of like directed into. We talk about government services. One thing about government services that I met, this was during COVID when I was doing the real estate stuff. Remember forbearance? When the mortgage forbearance, where you could kind of claim financial hardship and just have what is it? The mortgage, the kind of payments like tacked onto the back of the end of your the loan, and then you can just kind of whatever. You did not have to provide documentation for financial hardship, and I know at the time, obviously, I was working with people who were realtors, owned tons of properties and like were millionaires, whatever. They claimed forbearance. So they could, but they still kept getting rent from their tenants and pocketing 100% of it as cash flow and still going to church. And so, I think there's like the narrative is like, so righteousness is a fine line. And like the narrative that I think I've come from, and which I think is I'm really keen to find ways to get out of and find a new path, is where essentially you can use the tools of the world to continue to give yourself opportunities for God to provide for you or whatever. And so, Jason, you talk about how scaling is where we sort of assume scaling is the measure of success. Like, okay, if I, you know, right now I freelance. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if I can make enough money so I can get an assistant, so I can keep making more money and hire some other people so that we can keep making, like, that is my measure of success. That is also very much in the Christian mindset, because even think of like when I was growing up, what is the measure of success for your Christian life is how many people did you convert? So it's a sales game. But to the question that I had was about, well, I guess it is about this. Jason is like, yeah, I get the gist of the critique on kind of scaling and this notion of like bigger is better. But at the same time, I would venture to guess that if we can help more people, the world will get better. In the sense of, if we can create a world where more people are living in the world that they deserve based on whatever circumstances they have, that is a better world for all of us. So that is in some ways like a scaling thing. Like it is a like helping more people thing. So if the radical guide is supposed to is helping a lot of people, like you'll have to somehow increase in order to reach that a lot of people, or am I still have I fallen into into a binary that I don't know.
Well, I think there is not necessarily a binary, but I think it's a come from that falls in the same domain as scale. Because of the narrative that you provided, not saying you did anything wrong, but just for the sake of the conversation.
Yeah.
That you put the purpose of this work is to help other people. That's not the purpose. We're not here to help anybody.
Dang, man, this guy always has a fucking answer.
What did he say?
I said this guy always has a fucking answer. Killing me.
Well, I lost my train of thought. So
Sorry, man.
What I was saying is that the purpose and the goal is not to help other people, because the moment you start saying I'm here to help you, you've created a hierarchy. You created a narrative that says I have the answers, you don't, so I'm here going to save you. And when you do that, scale makes perfect sense in that, because it's a resource allocation. It's the same thing that you were talking about in the soul harvesting or the conversion of
Soul
work.
Harvest actually is a really nice way to put it.
Sounds
Soul
like a video
Harvest is
game
awesome.
superpower.
I know.
Yes,
Yeah.
our soul
Soul
harvester
Harvest.
is at level 5 now.
So Max, very like random aside, Max plays tons of Minecraft. Not in a bad way, but just like he plays it a lot and like he keeps getting these add-ons. So I just imagine like this Minecraft add-on called Soul Harvest. You can just put that. So sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But that's the trap that we get into, because we're taught to think of the world in this capitalist frame. So this
Yeah.
goes back to when we talk about racism, white supremacy. You know, we have in our mind that it's this one thing. So when we talk about capitalism, we think it's this one thing. But what capitalism is the system. It's how
Mhm.
things are applied and how we think about doing things. So when we think about, again, this is where the charity mindset versus the mutual aid mindset are completely different, because charity comes from that same
Mhm.
mentality that you brought into the conversation, is like, we're here to help people.
Mhm.
We're not here.
Yeah.
The moment you say, I'm not here to help people, and you realize, I mean, truly realize, and come from the place is like, oppression is systemic. It affects all of us. And there's not going to be a solution or something on the table, an application that is going to say, oh, if I just remove oppression for them, it's going to remove
Mhm.
oppression for me or for somebody else. So the narrative in that I'm here to help people has removed you from the
Mhm.
ecosystem.
Mhm.
The approach is that we are part of this. I mean, I think we talked about this before, maybe it was off air, you know, and going back to kind of what Matt was pointing at too, is like, when we look at trying to build something, there's a come from an understanding that we need to see the world differently. So we can't build the world with the same tools that the world was built with. We can use those tools until we
Yeah.
get clarity to build something new, but we shouldn't always rely on the tools that we're using today. Those are just what's accessible to us. And I think a good example of kind of giving the big picture of this would be that conversation that we had off air a couple of weeks back, and that's the comparison or the narrative between understanding what abuse is and what oppression is. So on the individual level, on the community level, um, to kind of build the narrative on this is the realization of abuse. Any individual, single person, can remove themselves from an abusive situation.
Mhm.
If they're in an abusive partnership or relationship, their partner could die, and that abuse would no longer be there. If that person in the abusive relationship moves and is no longer in contact with that abusive person, that abusive situation ends.
Mhm.
There's a realization that oppression is systemic. Not one individual can ever change and dissolve oppression because it's
Mhm.
systemic. It requires a community to be able to resolve and end oppression.
Mhm.
So I can never, going back to white supremacy, racism, systemic racism, I cannot move from Texas to California and say I'm free from the system of racism. It
Mhm.
is built into the system. But I can work with a community, and the community can resolve, how are we going to address power dynamics? How are we going to address white supremacy, systemic oppression that shows up within our institutions, within our community, within each other? We can build something like that changes that. And the beauty of that is that what we come up with in our community, let's just say the three of us, let's say the three of us is our community, what we come up with in our community to resolve this oppressive system may not be the same tools and mechanisms that a community
Mhm.
in New York or Chicago or somewhere else that come up with. But this systemic oppression is the same in all those
Yeah.
areas.
Mhm. Mhm.
So not falling into binary, the narrative then becomes, well, how do we address white supremacy and systemic racism across the nation or across the world and stuff? It's not that this group of three came up with the best idea and those folks in Chicago don't have a good idea. It's the recognition that we are all working towards resolving and dissolving this oppression. We
Mhm.
just manifest it differently based on our own lived experiences and based
Mhm.
on what's happening with us. So the recognition is like, well, what they're doing in Chicago can teach us something about how we approach it. What we're doing here can teach Chicago what they're doing. And there may not be changes, but there's a conversation and a
Mhm.
relationship that
Mhm.
starts to build this network of shared understanding of how do we
Mhm.
remove our culture, our values, our institutions from these systems of oppressions that are so entrenched. And we just talked
Mhm.
about systems of white supremacy and capitalism within the Christian right co-opting movement language. That is, it's not, this type of oppression is not obvious until you're engaged
Mhm.
with talking to the community is like, how are you impacted? What are you going
Mhm.
to do about it? What are we going to
Mhm.
do about it? Where you
Mhm.
start seeing these things that we've taken for granted is actually feeding into it. You know, the old saying that if you watch TV, if you watch the news, if you read the newspaper, and if you're on social media, you're racist. Because there's no way that you can go through your life digesting all that media and not absorbing that systemic racism.
Mhm.
There's just no way. And so, with that realization, whether it's true or not, but even with the realization, what conversations are you having with your community?
Mhm.
What narratives are you justifying? What
Mhm.
narratives are you giving legitimacy to? And in those conversations, you create something different. You start creating different tools as well. Um, and that's not a narrative also of, oh, we got to drop out. You can still function and use these tools. We can, we're using what Riverside to record this. Well, I don't know what the policies and principles of the founders of this organization that created this platform is, but once we want to make a change of that, we can collectively say, let's build our own tools and do something about it. So not that it's scale, but I want to kind of pull it back to the scale question is like that's a different framework and a different approach to how we actually build something better that benefits us all, but that can reach a lot of people. To me, that's not scale. That's the relationship aspect of it. That is really building that world that works for all of us. Because the world right now doesn't work for all of us. Anyway, soapbox.
I guess my question then becomes, how do you, if we're not going to, trying to avoid the language of scale, um,
I mean, you can use it. I'm just saying I don't agree with it.
right. Well,
Well, I mean, well, think back. Think about I think about I guess farming, like propagating is like increasing, but it's not like a scalish thing. I think it's like the more of an organic kind of a growth. I think there's a bit of a obviously there's a moral judgment in that the more people that have the world that they deserve, the more just the world becomes. So there is this like a moral judgment. However, there isn't a. It's not a. What's the word?
we're going to have to edit a lot of these blank spaces out, aren't we?
Oh, don't worry about it, Matt. There's an AI tool for that, brother. We gonna be just fine.
The tools of the man.
It's like, hey man,
Speaking of oppression, yeah.
it's like I'm just a one man show here. I gotta make it easy for me, man. Until the world can become a better place for me, Jason. I gotta
Because
gotta
right
use
now
what I
it's
got. It's- right now it's not. Right now this is not the world I deserve. I tell you that. There isn't a. It's not a. There isn't an economic there isn't economic undertones to it, and and I think to me that sounds like a much better thing. Again, I remember talking about, and I think when I was sharing my stories about with the missionary and industrial complex, about the question I had back then was, thinking about, okay, when do we know that we don't have to be here anymore? And it's that, like, the creating a situation where we don't have to be there, but the community can continue to thrive. And also that's not tied to any sense of like religious fulfillment, in that if I am a missionary in some place that there's, like, let's say, I can't imagine without, actually I have a friend who's got this really cool program that they're out building houses out in Eswatini, and it very much is like a mutual aid type situation, and he's there because like it's 100% conversation based. But it's like if he were to leave, there's no sense in which like, okay, I'm no longer like living up to my religious potential that God has called me to and given me the gifts and blah 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 blah. Like he's leaving because the community, like in the community conversation is like, hey man, we don't need you no more. But we still are can be in relationship and conversation. But I think that's the point you made, Jason, about helping and how that kind of creates this hierarchy. Instantly my mind goes into the missionary nursing classroom, which I cannot still look. I don't know, it feels like in some ways it's either the best of what we have, or sorry, it's the best of what we have so far, or it's the best of what anybody knows about so far. And so I just it's I just have to, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know kind of situation. But I do see that as like the reason why I could never stay there, I could never do it was, and the same reason why I could never do real estate is because it just was a 100, like completely imbalanced hierarchy that kept people below at the bottom and kept me or whoever it was above them in like this perpetual imbalance or perpetual inequality that sort of just becomes managed rather than trying to be corrected.
Yeah,
The end.
I think, I think just using that model, that's an access point in that is like even so like a lot of people would look at that and say, well, how did you go up against something so big and so entrenched that is considered the norm? And the quickest way, one of the quickest ways, not the only quickest way, but would be really investing in those conversations of really like, well, if you're there, again, I'm not saying this is a model, I'm just using it as an example. If somebody in that situation that's there starts talking to the community and saying, what do you really want? What's not working for you in this agreement or situation? And what would you like to see differently? And then once that becomes clear, then the conversation becomes, would you want to work towards making those changes? And then figuring out what the willingness and what folks want to do, and then start putting those into action. Look at that. What is that? I want it.
You can talk to them, buddy.
What's up, buddy?
What do you got?
So speaking of free, so I do UGC stuff. So this is like the funnest thing I've gotten in a long time. It's a hot dog griller. It's a hot dog toaster.
I think I saw
Oh,
one
you
of
put the
those in
buns in there?
What's that?
Toaster only for hot dogs.
You can toast. You toast the bun and the glizzy at the same time.
That's awesome. Are you gonna put that in your room?
Bedside. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, my room or his room?
His room. His room. He's like,
his
I've
room.
already
Yeah,
claimed
of
it.
course. Oh, yeah. Yo, his room. Yeah, his room. Of course, his room. Not my room. Not at all. His room. All right, buddy, please go. I have to finish this thing. Well, thank you.
Yeah, he's taking over.
Okay, well, he has the AirPods, so I'm gonna just mute myself in case he starts talking.
Well, the good news is, friends, is that we have reached an hour, so
Not done.
we can end it there, and because it looks like Moki has to go with Max and maybe toast some weenies. I don't know why I said it like that.
I don't know.
You have a
Just-
way with
hey, man.
words.
Yeah, but a very bad way with words, but nevertheless, it's a way.
At one point, I was running for student government in grad school because we had a grad school student government thing, and I remember when I ran and won, my buddy said that my motto should have been Matt Break, change you'll be uncomfortable with at first. And that sort of feels like my life motto. So anyway, friends, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. We as always, if you have questions or comments, we would love to hear from them. Either if you're watching this on YouTube, please leave comments below. If you want to send us an email, onequestionpodcast1q@gmail.com. We will address questions or comments on the air if they're relevant, or many of you have just commented, and so comments are fine. We love reading comments. You are free to check out Radical Guide, support what Jason is doing there. All that info will be in the show notes, probably. And we will see you next time.
See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye.